All right, good morning, guys. I say good morning. It's morning right now. You may not watch this in the morning, so if you watch it in the afternoon, no big deal. Today we're going to be talking about cities and empires in section 2. If you remember in the end of section 1, we mentioned how the agricultural revolution or them learning to farm allowed them to stay in one spot, and that was led to the development of new cultures, new civilizations in different areas of the Americas. When we talk about a civilization, there's basically 6 characteristics of a civilization. Okay. The early peoples that were nomads, they didn't have these characteristics. So in order to be considered a civilization, you had to have these 6 things. One, you had to have some form of government. You had to have cities. You had to have religion, art, language, and some form of writing. Okay, those were all the characteristics that they took into consideration to say, okay, this group was a civilization because they had all these things. Okay, those early nomads, they didn't have cities. They may have had a language, but they didn't have all the religions and the art and different things like that most of the major civilizations had. Okay, and there's 4 major civilizations that we're going to talk about in section 2. Okay, they were flourishing in an area called Mesoamerica. You've probably never heard that term before. Okay, but all that means is Middle America. Okay, where do you think Middle America is? Yeah, in the middle of America. Okay, so you've got North America, South America. Right in the middle, you have Mesoamerica or Middle America, and that's where 3 of the 4 civilizations will thrive at the height of their power. Okay, and we'll talk about those, and then we'll talk about the 4th, which was in a different area. Okay, so the map here, this is Mesoamerica. Southern Mexico, parts of Central America, Belize, Guatemala, El Salvador, Honduras, in those areas. Okay, so the 4 civilizations that we'll talk about was the Olmec, which is the orange here. Okay, so that was where their area, that's where they thrived. We'll talk about the Aztec, which is the yellow area here. Obviously, they ruled a much larger area. We'll talk about the Mayans, who were this green area here. Okay, but you see the brown, the borders of all of these civilizations extended further. These were kind of the major areas here. The 4th will flourish in South America, and we'll talk about that here in just a little bit. Okay. So the first civilization that we'll talk about is the Olmec. Okay, they will flourish from around 1200 BC, okay, to about 800 BC. And with all of these civilizations, scientists don't really know what happens or what leads to the decline of these groups. With some of them we do, some of them we don't. With the Aztec, it's because the Spanish bring diseases and it basically wipes them all out. But we'll talk about that later. Okay, but the Olmec will flourish from 1200 to 800 for about 400 years there in Mesoamerica. This is going to be the earliest known civilization that we know about. Okay, we'll talk about others, but they will be larger. But this is the earliest, the Olmec. They were known for working with stone. They built stone houses. They built stone monuments. Again, scientists they're not 100% certain, but the Olmec were known for carving these massive 1 to 2 ton stone heads that they just started finding out in the jungle where their civilization was located. Just these massive stone heads that would take many people to try and move. They don't even know how the Olmec got these stone heads into the places where they were located, where they were discovered. But that's what they were known for. There's a picture of one right there. I said weighed thousands of pounds. The theory is they got logs and they laid logs down and they would roll these stone heads and just move the logs as they went along. And that's how they got those monuments to the different parts of their civilization. we don't know a whole lot about the Olmec, okay? But those are some things we do know. It was the earliest. They worked with stone, and again, we don't know what led to their decline. They just kind of disappeared, okay? So next we'll talk about the Mayans. We know a whole lot more about the Mayan civilization. Some of you might go visited some Mayan ruins. You can still do that today. But they'll flourish from 250 to around 900 AD. Okay, they were farmers. They grew a lot of the same crops that we've talked about with those early nomads: maize, beans, squash. Okay, but it was thought that they grew enough crops to feed the entire population, which was at the height of their civilization was about 2 million people. Okay, so that's a lot of crops they got to grow. They were active traders. All the crops that they grew, they would trade. They would trade these things for other items: deer meat, cotton, anything that these other groups were trading with. And really, a lot of the times they were trading kind of amongst their own people, because the civilizations that we're talking about weren't going on at the same time. Obviously, this is 1,000 years after the Olmec. They created a city-state with rulers and a military force. Really, all these civilizations were known for conquering groups of people. They would conquer these people, make them slaves, and use them for other purposes, which we'll get to in just a second. Okay, their civilization was a theocracy. Okay, and basically what that means is they didn't have a king or queen. The religious leaders ruled society. Okay, the Mayans believed that everything in nature was some sort of god, and so that's what they worshipped. These aspects of nature, the sun, the moon, the stars. They worshipped all these things. They believed that it was very important to sacrifice to these gods, and I don't mean offering fruits and vegetables. Okay, they offered humans. Okay, they believed, I mean, they knew that rain was the lifeblood of the earth, and so they thought that in order to please the gods to bring rain, they needed to sacrifice people, because blood was the life of individuals. So they believed if you sacrificed individuals, those gods would then send the rain and they would have a good harvest. Okay, so the Mayans and all these civilizations were known for sacrificing humans to their gods in order to try to please their gods. If you've ever seen the movie Apocalypto, it's a movie about the Mayan civilization, and it's pretty gory. I don't recommend you watching it, but it does deal with the Mayans and their human sacrifice. And so maybe when you're older, you can go back and watch that movie. They knew a whole lot about astronomy. They learned astronomy. They could tell. They could tell when the seasons were going to change by learning astronomy. They came up with a 365-day calendar. They even knew when there were going to be eclipses by studying the stars. They knew when a solar or lunar eclipse was coming. Okay, just like we can tell those things today. They learned how to do that with zero to little technology. Okay, they learned to study the stars, and they knew when those things were going to happen. They developed a system of mathematics. So they used numbers. Their counting system was based on 20. I don't know if that means they could only count to 20, or they counted by 20s, or how the whole number system that they had worked. But I do know they had a method of counting that was based on the number 20. Okay, so they were good with numbers. They were good with math. And when you see some of the things that they built, you can understand they had to be good with those sorts of things. Their writing was hieroglyphics. What's a hieroglyphic? Okay, just a picture that represents a word or a symbol that represents a phrase. Okay, kind of like you maybe have heard about the Egyptian hieroglyphics. Okay, they didn't have letters. Each picture represented a word or a phrase, and that's how they could write and communicate with each other, besides speaking. This is a Mayan temple. You can actually go to, like I said, Mexico. You can visit these ruins. Okay, but in order to create something like this that long ago, obviously they had to be good with math and with numbers. The top of the temple here is where they would have the religious ceremonies. This is where the priest would be. Okay, this is where they would offer the human sacrifices. Okay, and so really everything was centered, when it came to religion, was centered around the Mayan ziggurat or the Mayan temple. This is the Mayan hieroglyphics. Okay, you can see the pictures and the symbols that represented different words, different phrases. And if you have questions, don't ask, because I don't have a clue what these pictures or symbols mean. I just have a picture of Mayan hieroglyphics. And so this is the Mayan calendar. Okay. Again, how they use that, I have no idea. But this was the Mayan calendar. If you remember, well, probably, but the Mayan calendar actually only went to 2012. So back 8 years ago, when the Mayan calendar was ending, a lot of people thought, oh, that's going to be the end of the world. Their calendar only went to 2012. The end of the world's coming then. Obviously, that didn't happen, and we're still here today. So, but this is the Mayan calendar. All right, the Aztec. Okay, this was another major civilization in Middle America. They're going to arrive in Mexico around AD 1250, so the year 1250. Okay, early on, this was a group of warrior nomads. Okay, they were constantly on the move. And legend has it is that they were on the move because there was a story or a prophecy, I guess, that they had that said, once you find a eagle eating a snake, that's where you're supposed to set up your capital, or that's where you're supposed to settle down and build your civilization. Okay, so they were constantly on the move looking for this sign from their gods. The god that gave that sign, his name was Quetzalcoatl. Okay, he was the sun god. He was the main Aztec god that they worshipped. Okay, and it was said that he said, when you see this eagle eating a snake, that's where you'll settle down. Okay. Well, they finally see that on a small little marshy island in Lake Texcoco down in Mexico. They see this eagle sitting on top of a cactus. He's eating a snake. They say, okay, there's our sign. This is where we're supposed to set up our capital city, or where we're supposed to start to build our civilization. So they built this major city. At the time, it was the largest city in the world. When the Europeans arrived, the Spanish conquistadors said it was even more grand than the city of Rome. And Rome was a beautiful city at the time. But this capital city was called Tenochtitlan, which means place of the prickly pear cactus. That's where they saw the eagle eating the snake on top of the cactus. But it was basically out in the middle of this marshy, swampy area. Excuse me. They've selected very strong kings, again, that could help them go out and conquer other people. The Aztec were not known for being very pleasant people. Do what they wanted you to do. You were either killed or you were offered as a human sacrifice. It's a picture of Tenochtitlan, again, out in the middle. They built these causeways. They brought in dirt and they built causeways. And you can see the one down here on the bottom that connected the city to kind of the mainland. But this was their major capital city here in the middle of the lake. picture of what it possibly looked like. You can see the lake back in the background, but it was, like I said, basically out in the middle of this lake where they built their capital city. They believed death was very honorable, and that there were only certain people that could enter the afterlife. One of those were soldiers. They said they wanted to go out, they wanted to conquer everybody. So if you died in battle, that was considered very honorable, and you would enter the afterlife. And obviously the priests and the high up individuals, the kings, obviously they were going to go to the afterlife as well. And these are the more common people. Again, if you were a captive and you were offered as a sacrifice, they considered that very honorable. And so you were able to enter the afterlife if you were used as a human sacrifice. And then mothers who died in childbirth. Okay, if you were giving birth to another Aztec, what would be Aztec soldier, and you happen to die, which was not uncommon back then you could enter the afterlife as well, because you were doing your part in helping, make more Aztec children. Okay. All right. So the last one, the Inca. The Inca were led by a man. They were led by several different people, but at the height of their empire, they were led by a man named Pachacuti, and his son took over after him. His name was Topa Inca. Okay, but they built what was the largest empire of all the four. Okay, up in the Andes Mountains. It basically stretched from the north of South America all the way down to the south of South America. And I'll show you a picture here in just a second. Okay. It stretched for over 3,000 miles. So that's a huge area that they covered there in South America, the Inca Empire. In order to unify all the people, because like I said, that's a large area. So to unify these people, Pachacuti created a very strong central government. He required everybody in the empire to learn Quechua, which was the Incan language. Okay, so everybody spoke the same language in the Incan Empire. He went out and had 10,000 miles of roads built throughout the empire, connecting the entire empire throughout all of the Andes Mountains. And I'll show you a picture of those roads here in just a minute too. Not quite like the roads we know today. If you were 5 years or over, you were required to work. Obviously, the little 6-7-year-olds couldn't do what the older men could, but they had jobs. So you were required to do some sort of labor. If you were 25 to 50, and I said you could be drafted into the army. If you were 25 to 50, basically you served in the army. You didn't have a choice. Again, because they were also another group that went out and conquered other individuals and had slaves and sacrifices as well. Built very large structures to please their gods. And I'll show you some pictures of some ruins here in just a minute throughout South America. You may have heard of the famous Incan city Machu Picchu. Okay, that's high up in the Andes Mountains, and you can actually go and visit those ruins as well. And I'll show you a picture of that too. They learned to farm. Okay, you think, well, how are they going to farm up in the mountains? Well, they learned that they could build these terraces, which were just kind of these steps, and they could bring in soil on these steps, and they could grow their crops on the sides of the mountains. Okay, a very intelligent feat for these individuals, learning that they could go ahead and grow these crops on the sides of mountains. They invented what was called the quipu, which was a rope that had all these cords coming off of it that had knots on them, and somehow they could count and do mathematical calculations. They could keep records with those quipus. Again, you had to be very intelligent to use those things. They didn't have calculators or abacus or things like that the Chinese invented later. Okay, but they invented this quipu, and they learned how to keep records and do math and all these things by using that. It was basically the Incan calculator is what it was. So here's where their empire stretched from way up here all the way down to the south. Okay, so very large area. You can see the Pachacuti conquered this area. His son Topa Inca, a much larger area, the yellow, and then the next one there, I can't hardly read that one, but that was the height of the Incan Empire there. Machu Picchu, way up in the Andes Mountains, and you can kind of see some of the terraces here where they grew their crops. Just another picture of some Incan terraces, these steps. Their crops would be grown along here. And again, another set of ruins, another city. You can see the terraces. This was an Incan road. This is where the roads that they built that you can actually travel on throughout the Andes Mountains. Again, not like what we know today. And then the quipu. Somehow they would use these cords with the knots and the colors, and they could do their mathematical calculations. Used it, I have no idea, but they were, like I said, they were very intelligent, and they learned to do that with these things. Okay, so there's your lesson 2 notes. Okay, make sure you write those down, and I'll be posting a quiz for you to take. And if you have questions or problems with it, just let me know. We'll see what we can do. See y'all later.